Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this fabulous film. And we're really excited to have a conversation here with James Hawes, the director of the film, One Life. James, I have to tell you, this was really one of the most emotional and beautiful films I've seen in a very long time. Where did this come from for you? Where did you connect to this story?
I have a history way back in my television directing days of working on real events, true stories, films about real people. Um, and I owe my career growing up at the BBC. The second job I ever did was as a trainee researcher on a program called That's Life, which, for anybody who sees the film will know, becomes pretty critical in the unfolding of the Nicky Winton story. Um, so when this script landed in my inbox and people said, well, you should look at this link and you should think about this project, it felt like my life was turning a circle. This was a story I felt needed to be told now. I had my own history invested in a part of its television history. Yeah, that was then suddenly 3 years of my life.
So let's dig into that a little bit. Why is it so important to tell this story now? The story, it's been told in different ways. We're many years past, of course, the history. Nicholas Winton not with us anymore, unfortunately, though he held on for for pretty long.
Mm.
Um, why tell the story now?
Remember that this is before Ukraine, before what was happening in the Middle East, although both of those things we should touch on and come back to. Um, Above all, a story about our new relationship with borders, with refugees, and the way that has been emerging over the last decade, made it feel to me a time to be telling a story that asked us to think again about what we mean by refugee. We tend to conjure up this, I think, generally fairly negative image of somebody in need, somebody that's going to demand, somebody that's arriving with a family that's going to be a burden on our country and destabilize our own domestic world. Well, I look at the children that Nicky Winton brought to Britain that then spread around the world, but many of them, most of them still in Britain. And the contributions that they have made to community, to society, to profession since are enormous. And perhaps that's partly because they felt grateful, they felt like they needed to give something back. I know that's the case in many instances. But also, we claim Nicky Winton in the UK as this extraordinary British English story. He was a first generation child of refugees arrived from Germany. Um, we need to rethink who those people are and what they might bring to our society now. And God knows that feeling from 3 years ago to the place we are today, we as the filmmakers hate to think that we're capturing any wind under our wings because of the awfulness of the situation in the world around us. But I do think it means it's even more important to be telling a story about our responsibility to humanity, about the power of decency and good, about what one person can do in the face of this overwhelming awfulness.
I couldn't agree more, and I find that actually, we have to learn from our history, of course, and these lessons are not just there to remember, but actually to understand where their relevances are in our world, and this couldn't be more relevant. Jumping off of the last point you just made, that that modesty and the giving without expecting glory from it, that's something that's universal. It has nothing to do with, like, the specifics of the story or the specifics of what are going on in the world now. This is about and just an amazing individual, and how he understands the importance of giving. And I feel that was really emphasized in the film, and in every moment that we see Nicholas Winton on the screen. Is that something that resonates
Yeah,
for you?
and totally. And it was a very big thing for Anthony and Johnny both playing the role. They were sort of hugely taken. Johnny was the first one to talk about it. It is the antithesis of the Insta generation, which is to take your selfie with whomever you're giving the donation to. And I know that's That's a sweeping generalization, but there is so much of that in our current society. Look how great I'm being. Um, uh, Look how generous I'm being. We're encouraged even by charities to post to pass on the message. I get that, but Nicky was the polar opposite. He did it because it was the right thing to do, and even though he didn't know if he was the right person, he was there in that moment and had to try. And also, it's this other thing. I think we can all be excused for going, how can I possibly impact the politics of Ukraine and Russia, the politics of Israel and Gaza? I'm sat over here. Well, you're not expected to do that, but you can do your little bit, and it might be a very local little piece of help. But Nikki talked about the power of active goodness. It's not enough just to be good. You have to seek out and go and do good in whatever little way.
And how do you explain this? How do you explain the phenomenon of Nicholas Winton? What drove him? What was he abnormal?
No, quite the opposite. He was incredibly normal. He obviously had the benefit of his heritage, which probably made him more sensitive to the coming war in Europe, the gathering storm. So when he got to Prague and he saw what was on the ground, he knew what the likely consequences were going to be. He felt it in his bones. He could see it because he was very alert and interested in politics and what was going to happen in Europe. He'd worked in Germany. He'd worked in Germany in the early 30s at a time when Germany was trying to recover from their punishments after the First World War. He could see where things were going. But otherwise, he kept saying, I'm an ordinary man. I don't have a big bank account. I don't have special skills. I just have a dogged determination, and I'm going to try and make this happen.
Now, he is an ordinary man, but he did take part in really, as you started off all of this, in a truly historic moment on television. I mean, I've seen the documentaries made about him, and that moment, to be in a room where suddenly you're surrounded as a complete surprise by all these people that you have impacted their lives and have actually, saved their lives, is really truly one of the greatest moments in the history of television. I don't know if that's recognized in the BBC in that way, but definitely should be. And knowing this as I was watching the film, I was so curious how you were going to bring this to life, that moment. And you did it extremely effectively. I was in tears. I'm sure our entire audience is in tears too, and everybody who sees this movie. It is so effective. How did you approach that? How did you know how to
Well,
make that so well?
well, with trepidation, but also I have this history, as you probably know, that I worked on That's Life. And Esther was my boss once upon a time. She's made quite a play more recently of saying that I was a crap researcher, and it's just as well I got into directing. But she was a show person. I mean, there's some kind of musical end of the pier impresario to the way she was able to hold the reveals and bring the audience into that moment. I was terrified because obviously that clip on YouTube goes viral 2 or 3 times a year globally, and it makes people cry. So
Yeah.
I had to find a way to at least achieve that. The key thing I changed was I made it Nikki's experience. This was not the experience of Esther Ranson, the presenter's point of view, or what the studio cameras showed to an audience back home. We had the camera sitting on Nikki's shoulder, feeling the experience, unsure about what was going to happen next, in the intimacy of the moment when he first meets Vera. That was the attempt. And then even the dash to the bathroom afterwards to splash water on his face and look himself in the eyes. That's part of the evening that he was going through and the emotion he was having to handle.
Wonderful, wonderfully done. The film itself also, because it's so based on reality and based on something that a lot of people have seen, how important was it for you to keep direct reality with the story, versus where are there some changes from the story?
Well, look, I mean, we claim based on a true story, and I think it very firmly is. In fact, just last night I was sitting with 2 of the Kinder the original Kinder, who talked about, for them, it's not watching a movie, it's watching a lived experience, which is huge testament, really, to the skills of everybody who took part in it, from the writers and the producers at the beginning before I even joined, and on through. But we went out of our way, and I always would, with a true story, to get every detail possible correct where we can. There are limitations. We simply don't have the correct rolling stock for those trains anymore. Liverpool Street Station in London denied us permission to film there. So we had to create some of those things. Plus, you end up ascribing lines to different characters, conflating characters. We have 2 hours to tell the story. Sometimes I think those are allowable changes. And we did one awful thing, I'll confess to. There's a scene when Nikki plays the piano. That happened because on the set, Anthony Hopkins saw a grand piano, which was part of the household furnishings. And while they were rigging the lights and getting the dolly track ready, he just sat down and started serenading the crew, which was a magical moment. And surrounded by all this rubbish, I thought this has to be in the film. That's Nicky, instead of having the drink later, let's have him at the piano, surrounded by all Nicky's rubbish. Yeah, that became part of the film, even though Nicky never played the piano. And I confess and excuse myself.
Never played the piano. Nevertheless, Anthony Hopkins is fantastic, and what a perfect casting job. He was born to play it. Having those pictures at the end, I think, really emphasizes that and brings that to life. How did he? Was he like the obvious choice? Did he come to you? How did that all develop?
Well, I don't know if you know this, but when Barbara Winton handed over the rights for the project to Seesaw Films, she turned to the producers and said, there is a condition. Anthony Hopkins needs to play my father, which is, that's a big ask of any producers. Let's have one of the greatest living actors of our time. She wrote directly to Anthony saying, I would be honored if you would play my father. Obviously, then Anthony and his representation would do some research into the story and see if this was something that interested him. Then he has to have the script. And then we had a lengthy breakfast. We were scheduled for an hour and a half, he and I, in a hotel in Bel Air. And 4 hours later, we were still going. And we discovered a sympathy and a mutual an agreement about how the character should be played, how this film should feel. We didn't want it to be over saccharine. We didn't want it to be melodramatic. We felt there was enough emotion in the film without us adding to that. And that's where the choice of tone word for the whole movie came, which was restraint. We think there should be a very English, very Nicky Winton restraint to how this is acted, to how it's shot, to how it's played.
Beautiful and beautifully done. My final question to you is the title of the film, and of course, there's that reference during that lunch there to one life. He who saves one life he has saved the entire world. I had looked that up, and it goes back to the Mishnah, actually. That quote, thousands of years. Was that always the obvious title? I feel that was also underplayed.
Well, deliberately. It was a title. We discussed the title a lot. And I get nervous about titles that could potentially feel too on the nose, too signaled. It's fascinating, whatever project you do. And I've been on projects where we have really struggled to find the right title. And then you get to a point where you think, how could it ever have been anything else? And I rather feel that's where we've landed now. And particularly because it is delivered so thrown away, and in a secondary scene in many ways. I think it works. And in terms of the timing of the film and the message it's trying to send out now, it seems ultimately appropriate.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this beautiful film. Folks, spread the word about this film, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you very much.